The road didn't look like a road anymore. It looked like the end of something, a thin gray scar swallowed by white, pressing deeper into pine forest that had long stopped caring whether anyone came through. The wind moved in long, low waves, bending the treetops and carrying the kind of cold that doesn't just chill you. It speaks to something older in your chest, some quiet animal part of you that understands, without being told, that the world out here does not negotiate. The truck moved slowly. It had to. Visibility was down to almost nothing, the headlights cutting maybe 15 feet into the dark before the snow took them whole. Inside the cab, two members of a regional wildlife rescue team sat forward in their seats, eyes scanning the shoulder, the ditch, the walls of timber on either side. The call had come in earlier that afternoon, a pair of hikers, shaken and breathless, reporting what they believed were injured lynxes near the back road pull-off. Maybe hit by a vehicle, maybe already gone. They couldn't be sure. The storm had moved in fast, and the hikers had moved faster. That was hours ago. Now the team was deep in it, following coordinates from a GPS unit fogged at the edges, and the only sound besides the wind was the slow creak of wipers losing their argument with the ice. It was the passenger, a woman named Claire who had been doing wildlife rescue for going on 11 years, who saw it first. Not a shape exactly. More like a shadow that didn't move the way shadows should. She put her hand on the driver's arm without saying a word, and the truck eased to a stop. They both stared. There, just off the shoulder, where the ditch softened into a shallow hollow choked with snow and fallen pine bough, two small forms pressed together so tightly they looked, at first, like a single thing. A rock, a root ball, something the forest had simply exhaled and left there. Claire stepped out first. The cold hit like a wall. She moved carefully, the beam of her headlamp sweeping low across the snow, breath coming in short white plumes. The shapes didn't move. The closer she got, the more her stomach tightened, because she had seen this before. One animal draping itself over another in a last act of warmth, of proximity, of whatever wild creatures offer each other at the very end. It was one of the things in this work that stayed with you. She crouched down, reached out one gloved hand and stopped, a shiver, faint as a heartbeat. But there, she looked back at the truck. They're alive, she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. What happened in the next few minutes would be retold later with the careful economy of people who don't like to dramatize things they consider sacred. The two bobcats, because that's what they were, not lynxes, though the distinction must have meant nothing to them, were lifted gently from their hollow and wrapped in thermal blankets that the team kept in the truck bed for exactly this kind of night. Both animals were dangerously cold, their paws stiff, their coats matted with ice. The smaller of the two was a younger female, and she went limp and trusting in a way that sometimes means the body has simply stopped fighting. The other was larger, her build heavier, her sides carrying a fullness that Claire noticed but didn't yet register for what it was. What she did register, what she couldn't miss, was the way this second bobcat refused to let go. Even as they were separated and guided toward the carriers in the truck bed, the larger female strained toward the younger one, grunting low in her throat, her eyes half open and glassy with exhaustion but still searching. It wasn't aggression, it wasn't panic, it was something more specific than both of those things, something that required you to stop and pay attention to understand it. They loaded them carefully, secured the carriers and pulled back onto the road. The heater in the cab ran full. The snow kept coming. It was somewhere around the 20-minute mark on the drive back. The younger bobcat settled and still, the larger one increasingly restless, that Claire climbed into the truck bed to check on them. She watched the larger female shift her weight, watched the slow, labored heave of her sides, and felt something shift in her own understanding. This animal wasn't just injured, she wasn't just cold. She pressed her palm flat against the carrier door, not out of protocol, but out of some instinct older than training. The bobcat inside looked at her. Her sides rose and fell. Her breath fogged the metal grate between them. Claire sat back against the wheel well, the truck rocking beneath her, the pine forest blurring past in the dark and snow. She had assumed when they found them pressed together in that hollow, that the larger female had curled herself around the younger one for warmth, the way animals sometimes shelter each other out of closeness, out of bond, out of whatever mystery lives between wild creatures who choose to stay near one another, even when leaving would cost them nothing. But that wasn't what had been happening out there on that frozen road. She hadn't been shielding another bobcat. She had been shielding what was coming next. The small, wet, fragile lives still folded inside her, waiting in the dark, not yet knowing how close they had all just come to never arriving at all. The wildlife center was warm in the way that only matters after extreme cold, not comfortable exactly, but alive. Fluorescent lights hummed above the intake room as the team moved with quiet urgency, laying heated pads, pulling towels from the warmer, setting up the IV line with hands that worked faster than their faces let on. The younger bobcat stabilized quickly. The larger one, the one who mattered most right now, was placed in a low-walled whelping area lined with clean straw. And there she stayed, breathing hard, sides rolling with contractions she had likely been fighting through since long before the rescue truck ever found her. They named her Mara sometime in that first hour. No one remembers who said it first. It just settled over her the way names sometimes do, quietly, without ceremony, as if it had always been hers. The team worked around her in near silence. There is a particular kind of stillness that settles over a room when something is being decided, not by the people in it, but by something larger, and everyone who was there that night would describe it the same way afterward. They whispered encouragements she couldn't understand. They checked vitals with hands kept deliberately slow. They watched her the way you watch something you cannot help but cannot leave alone either. Her companion, the younger female, had been moved to an adjacent enclosure. She paced its length without stopping, pressing her nose to the wire partition, chirping softly in a register so low it was almost below hearing. Whether she understood what was happening, or simply refused to be far from it, no one could say. The first cry came just before midnight. It was small, barely a sound at all, more like the idea of a sound, and then it was followed by another, and another, until there were 3 of them, 3 kittens, each barely fitting in a human palm, trembling in the straw with the blind, furious determination of things that had decided, against considerable odds, to exist. No one in that room applauded. No one said much of anything. One of the younger staff members pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. Someone exhaled very slowly. That was all. Mara gathered them close, her whole body curving inward around them, and the restlessness that had driven her for hours, finally, completely stilled. She had been pulled from a frozen ditch, half dead, in the middle of a blizzard. She had labored through hypothermia and exhaustion, and the particular cruelty of a body being asked to give life while barely holding on to its own. And she had done it anyway. The weeks that followed moved the way recovery always does, not in dramatic leaps, but in the quiet accumulation of small things. A kitten nursing with more urgency than the day before, Mara's coat losing its roughness and filling back out, the hollows above her shoulders slowly rounding. The younger companion female, whom the team had taken to calling Rue, gaining weight steadily, her eyes brightening, her pacing giving way to something that looked, gradually, like rest. The rehab center had a particular rhythm before they arrived. It had a new one now. Caretakers who had no clinical reason to linger began finding reasons anyway. Someone would come in to check temperatures and stay 20 minutes longer than necessary, watching through the observation window as Mara positioned herself low in the straw and let her kitten stumble over her. Someone else would arrive early, coffee still in hand, just to see what the morning had brought. The 3 kittens, 2 females and a male, small and spotted and furiously alive, had been unofficially named by the 3rd week, though the staff kept that information off the official logs with the practiced discretion of people who know better and do it anyway. They called them the Snow family. Caretakers who had no clinical reason to linger began finding reasons anyway. Someone would come in to check temperatures and stay 20 minutes longer than necessary, watching through the observation window as Mara positioned herself low in the straw and let her kitten stumble over her. Someone else would arrive early, coffee still in hand, just to see what the morning had brought. The 3 kittens, 2 females and a male, small and spotted and furiously alive, had been unofficially named by the 3rd week, though the staff kept that information off the official logs with the practiced discretion of people who know better and do it anyway. They called them the Snow family. Mara proved herself a patient and deliberate mother. She taught without teaching, simply by doing and waiting and doing again. The kittens watched her stalk a dangling toy with total stillness, and then exploded after it themselves, all limbs and miscalculation. They learned to startle correctly, to press flat and wait, to use the corners of their enclosure the way their instincts told them to use the shadows of a forest they had never seen. Rue remained close through all of it, a quiet constant on the other side of the partition, her presence apparently meaning something to Mara that none of the humans could fully translate, but all of them recognized. It was during these weeks that something harder began to take shape beneath the warmth of it all. The kittens were growing, their paws, which had once fit entirely inside a palm, now spread wide and deliberate when they landed. Their eyes, which had opened into the fluorescent light of an intake room, now tracked movement with a focus that belonged to something older than this place. Mara's gaze, when it met the eyes of her caretakers, had shifted in a way that was difficult to name but impossible to miss. It was not the gaze of an animal that had forgotten what it was. It was the gaze of one that had simply been waiting, with more patience than anyone had the right to expect, to be returned to it. The team began preparing for what had always been the point of all of it. Spring came to the forest the way it always does after a hard winter, slowly at first, then all at once. The snowpack pulled back from the ridgelines, the creeks ran loud and brown with melt, and the pines that had stood silent through months of cold began releasing their scent into air that finally had warmth enough to carry it. The world that had nearly taken Mara and everything she carried was green again, and open, and waiting. The morning of the release was quiet. The team loaded the carriers before dawn, working without much conversation, the way people do when they've already said most of what needs saying in the days before. The drive to the release site took just over an hour, a ridge at the edge of protected forest, far from roads, where the tree line opened briefly before plunging back into deep timber. Someone had scouted it twice. The habitat was right. The season was right. Everything was right, which didn't make it easier. The carriers were set down on a carpet of pine needles and early moss. The doors were opened, and then the team stepped back and did the hardest thing this work ever asks of anyone. They waited, and they let go. Mara came out first. She stood at the threshold for a long moment, nose working the air, every muscle tuned to a frequency the humans beside her couldn't hear. The kittens pressed close behind her, wide-eyed and still. Rue emerged last, pausing the way Mara had, reading the same air, arriving at the same answer. Then Mara looked back. It lasted only a second, maybe less, but every person on that ridge felt it land. Not gratitude in the way stories like to assign it, not recognition in any simple sense, something quieter than both, an acknowledgement perhaps, that the line between her world and theirs had blurred for a season, and that what had passed between them was real, even if it had no name. Then she turned, and walked into the trees, and her kittens followed, and Rue followed after them, and the spotted coats that had once trembled in frozen straw dissolved into the dappled light of a forest that was ready to receive them. The team stood at the tree line for a while without speaking. Weeks later, a motion camera mounted half a mile and captured them, Mara moving through fresh snowmelt with her young strung out behind her, unhurried, sure-footed, whole. The footage made its way to the center's break room, where someone played it on a laptop one evening after a long shift. There were smiles. There were tears that nobody mentioned. She had been rescued once. What she had needed, all along, was simply the chance to finish what she had already started. Out in the cold and the dark and the snow, with nothing but instinct and the fierce, quiet insistence of a body that refused to give up on what it was carrying. She had needed the chance to bring her family home.